Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. The new hats, the new gear, the new website, all of it brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness, planetfitness.com, where they're socially distancing and trying to keep you safe while getting you in shape. I know it's hard, man. It's getting cold. Planet Fitness is there for you, nice and warm inside and wiping everything down and keeping you safe. Make sure you learn all about that. You can still work in, too. My man Teddy, I'm going to get him on the program next month. Western Fries, work those off. And the Royal Farms that I will be eating, well, this guy will be downtown doing Steelers and Ravens. He will be at the game this week. I'm doing the road games, which means I draw the Indianapolis and the New England duty a little later on in the month. Luke Jones joins us now. And I tell you what, as much as some of us went bye-bye during bye week and hung out for a couple days offline, got off the grid. Eric DeCosta was not off the grid during bye week, was he?
No, he wasn't. And the Ravens, even though maybe right now, as we're entering week 8 of the 2020 season, the pass rush isn't the number one issue in people's minds, it's something we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years. And Yannick, local fans are familiar with as a former Terp, Bowie native. So he's a local kid. That always makes it a little bit of a more enjoyable story. But he's someone who's been very productive from the time he entered the league in Jacksonville in 2016. I mean, he's been a very productive pass rusher, 8 or more sacks in each of his first 4 seasons. And as much as the pass rush has looked better the last few weeks, let's also keep in mind the Philadelphia Eagles had one healthy starter playing against them. Cincinnati, one of the big stories of the Bengals this year with Joe Burrow has been their inability to consistently protect him. And Washington, another team with a porous offensive line. So you can look at the numbers over the last 3 weeks and say, all right, Ravens had a nice run where they had a bunch of sacks. They had, 16 sacks, 41 quarterback hits over the last 3 weeks. Or you can go back to the night they lost to Kansas City, no sacks, 4 hits against Patrick Mahomes. I'm still going to look at that one and look at the bigger body of work over the last couple of years, knowing how much the Ravens have needed to depend on the blitz to get pressure on the quarterback. That works probably against 27 other teams in the NFL. But when you're talking about the teams come January, you're talking about Kansas City or maybe Pittsburgh. We'll see how that works out. Tennessee, Seattle on the other side of the tournament if you get to Tampa and the Super Bowl. But, at some point in time, you need to be able to consistently get to the quarterback with a 4-man rush, or at least be able to do it with a higher level of proficiency than the Ravens have shown over the last couple years. So that's where Yannick Ngakoue made perfect sense. It's a rental. We'll see what happens in terms of the Ravens signing him long-term. But when you consider the price, a 3rd-round pick and a conditional 5th-round pick, I think it's worth it. And I'm not looking at the last 3 weeks and saying the Ravens pass rush is fixed. And I think the other thing to point out about this is not just Kansas City in January, but the Ravens have taken some hits in their secondary from a depth standpoint. So they're 1 cornerback injury away to Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, or Jimmy Smith to then be leaning on someone like a Khalil Dorsey or a Terrell Bonds. So that deep depth that they had in the secondary at one point is not deep anymore. They still have a top 3 that they'll take against anyone in the NFL, not disputing that whatsoever, but this move is all about giving yourself more flexibility, giving yourself another way to win on defense. And come January, when you're hoping for that rematch with Patrick Mahomes, knowing that he kills the blitz, knowing that he annihilated their blitz back in week 3, this does give Wink Martindale another option to rush for a little bbit more and have Yannick Ngakoue and Matt Judon coming off the edges, and having Calais Campbell coming from an inside spot, or Pernell McPhee, or go down the list of some other guys you want to throw into the mix there. If you can more consistently get there with 4, and I think this move gives them a great opportunity to be able to do that, that's only going to improve your chances against Kansas City. Now, does that put them over the hump? I have no idea. But I think this is all about giving yourself another way to win. And much like you go back to last October and when the Ravens acquired Marcus Peters, most people were not talking about cornerback being their greatest need at that point in time. But we saw what that move was able to do in terms of transforming the defense. Will Ngakoue have that kind of profound impact? Time will tell, but he's certainly someone who has shown an ability to get after the quarterback, and that's something that you always like to have, especially for a team that has needed to blitz a whole lot to be able to do that. Not just this season, but going back the last couple years.
He is Luke Jones. He'll be covering all of the Ravens information this week, as it is Steelers week here, and the new and improved Ravens defense. You can find him at Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. Shout out to all of our sponsors, including Sporticulture with the Magma Flow here. My magma's like limply, like sort of move. I got to get it flowing a little earlier in the morning, and here's my morning 3 a.m. light. But you can order this, and you can get the flowers as well. They smell fantastic. Sporticulture, local. I got to get Court this month to come on here. He loves talking football with me, talking about flowers and all that good stuff. He gave me all these incredible spices and stuff to grow back in the spring, so we enjoyed incredible basil around here. My son has hung that stuff over at his place. So flowers and magma lamps, Sporticulture, and our friends at Walnut Springs and Court. It'd be good to have him on. Also, King Discount Liquors, if this pandemic goes any further and people don't vote the right way next week, King Discount Liquors is going to be my place. Lottery beer, booze, the best prices in Baltimore. My wife has inquired if we can get discounts on cases of tequila. I think Julio Bermejo will be very happy with us for doing that. But you don't need to buy it by the case. You can just buy it by the bottle, even though I bought a case of wine for the first time in my life during the pandemic. I am guilty. It was on sale. Paul King loves me. King Discount Liquors, get to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Also, while you're on the east side, make sure you're giving some love to our friends at Pizza John's. You know, my Pizza John's cup is off camera here. Let me grab it. So here's my Pizza John's cup. Don't go on Monday. It's a bad idea. Don't go 4th of July. You're laughing at me, Luke, because you know I got in the car and went over there 4th of July week and they were closed. And I should know better after 52 years.
Now, did you do that on a Monday, though? Did you? Was it the double whammy?
No.
See, that would have been funny if you went on the Monday of the first week of July when everyone who loves Pizza John's knows they're closed that week.
It says right on the cup, it says closed Mondays. Pizza John's, we love them. The subs, the pasta. They have cookies. They have ice cream. They have beer. They have things you don't know they have there. They have a crab cakes there.
Cheesecake is very good also. They have some cheesecake.
They have cheesecake?
Yeah. Black bottom cheesecake. And yeah, I mean, it's good stuff.
All right. Good enough. Let's get back to football here because you're making me hungry. You're making me want green peppers and mushroom and sausage, pepperoni and meat sauce and ravioli. And, my go-to there is a meatball sub, though, because they stuff it in. Mm-hmm. You never had the meatball where they stuff it in the sub? Pizza John's a place to do this. Just a little plug there for that. All right. I wanted to talk about, the whole notion of the Ravens as – and I'll talk about this with Peter King and Jason Cole and all these people that I'll be having on now that we're turning the corner and it's Pittsburgh week, and I'll chase some rock stars around here, Coach Billick and all of that. And they'll all give praise to the Ravens, but there really is a formula here, whether it's Damata Pecco, whether it's Trevor Price, whether it's just veteran players. And I was going to interrupt you and just, say sort of tongue-in-cheek, I'm surprised Suggs didn't want to come back and play 8 weeks, right? Like, that is where we are. But this should come as no shock that the team as comprised in week 2 or week 4 or week 6 is not the team we're going to see in week 12 or week 14 or week 16. It wasn't that way last year with LJ Fort and Bynes. Certainly not that way with Pecco later in the year. If for some reason there is an injury to this guy or that guy or something happens, I mean, look at Pittsburgh and Devin Bush this week. Look at Tennessee and what happened to their offensive line last week. So, the injuries are going to happen. When they happen, knowing that this organization is always ready to take whatever you and I are bitching about on Monday, whatever that is, because they don't think we're nuts when we bitch about the pass rush not being existent. Maybe John will stand up and play deflection guy and say it's fine, and Matt Judon will go get him this week and all of that. But they know better, and they know far more intimately than you or I or anyone else what their needs are. And if they have cap space, maneuverability with draft picks, maneuverability with free agents, whatever any of that is, they maximize their assets. This organization does that. It's probably one of the reasons they're 5-1. It's not luck.
Yeah, I mean that's what you have to do. You have plans and then you have to adjust in the same way that going into training camp, they weren't planning to cut Earl Thomas. Now, they knew that things weren't completely harmonious with Earl Thomas, and we've talked about that, and that's been chronicled and documented a little bit, and we saw a couple glimpses of that last year. But you have to adjust because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to go down with the torn ACL on the second day of training camp. You don't know what player is going to be a complete malcontent or what young guy that you were counting on to step forward doesn't do it. I mean, you don't have a crystal ball that's going to show you exactly how it's all going to play out. So that's where you kind. I
Look
use
at the
this.
Cowboys, dude. They've had one quarterback broken in half last weekend, and then this weekend there was the Joe Flacco Alonzo hit, right? Like
Sure.
that's how quickly things change in this league, even when you have a star on your helmet. And Jerry owns
Yeah.
the team.
Well, and even if you have a defense that could stop anybody, which they don't have that either. But I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, you want to give yourself some outs. That's the concept they talk about in poker a lot. You know, as someone who used to like to play poker a ton, doesn't really have time to do it anymore. But talk about outs. I mean, how many cards in the deck are there available to you that you could win the hand? And that's really what we're talking about here. Look, do I think going into the bye week that the pass rush was their absolute, unequivocally number one biggest need? Probably not. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a need. That doesn't mean it wasn't something that they shouldn't address if afforded the opportunity. And here's the reality: you can only make the moves that are available to you. In a perfect world, yeah, Antonio Brown would have been a model citizen and someone that wouldn't have domestic abuse concerns and wouldn't have all this baggage off the field. And you'd bring him in, and yeah, he's Marquise Brown's cousin.
And you know what? On the
And
internet, that's okay. On the internet, that makes perfect
right,
sense to people in their basement managing football teams.
sure. And look, people are going to say, well, Tampa Bay, an embarrassment of riches. And by the way, the Buccaneers look pretty good, and give them credit for that. But there was a point in time where Pittsburgh thought they could handle Antonio Brown. And by the way, they managed him very well for a long time. The way we've seen it play out since he's been gone from there, you kind of have a new respect for Mike Tomlin and that
By
organization
the
and
way,
what
they're
they put up
undefeated
with.
this week. I don't know if you heard or not.
Sure. But you look at that, you look at what Oakland gave up to get him and then said, we're out. And even New England, I mean, as much as we can certainly sit here and talk about the virtues or lack thereof of the Patriots on various issues, they looked at it and said, this isn't tenable. We need to get rid of this guy, even though they gave him a signing bonus. So, with Tampa Bay, Nestor, it might work out. And maybe the Buccaneers win the Super Bowl. And maybe from this point on, there isn't anything else that's going to cause Antonio Brown to be disciplined beyond the suspension he's currently finishing up at this point. But there's a lot that goes into that. But anyway, I'm getting off a little sidetracked here as far as what my original point was. You can only make the moves that are available to you. In a perfect world, yeah, some teams above average, a starting right guard would become available because they're out of it, or Marshall Yonda would regain 65 pounds overnight and show up in Owings Mills with a mask at the front gate and say, guys, I want a shot at another ring. I changed my mind. That's not happening. So you can look for some of these moves. You can try to force it, and lots of teams will do that. And look, I mean, the Ravens have forced moves before. I mean, I at the time that they signed Earl Thomas, I was a little surprised that they gave him the deal that they did relative to other interests that was out there at the time. I mean, he even admitted he was getting ready to sign a one-year deal, I think, with Kansas City at that point. So it's not as though you bat 1,000. And I'm not saying the Ravens should bat 1,000 or any team out there should be expected to bat 1,000. But you look at what's out there and you make moves that are available to you that make sense from a value standpoint. And you look at it and say, does this have a chance to make our football team better? And clearly with the Unique Ngakoue deal, and let's be clear, they were attempting to acquire him at various times in the offseason. We know reports came out right after Clowney wound up in Tennessee that the Ravens were exploring that, and they just couldn't make it work from a salary cap standpoint. So what happens here? Ngakoue goes to Minnesota, plays the first 6 games there. Vikings are 1-5, going nowhere fast, and the Ravens are able to acquire him at that point for a little bit of less money. because he did redo his franchise tag for a little flexibility there. And now you're about halfway through the season, so it's a little cheaper from a cap standpoint. Now the Ravens are really up against the cap at this point, so I'm not sure we can expect another move of consequence. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but shouldn't expect that. But you come down to it and say, yeah, in a perfect world, you'd have another wide receiver, or you'd add a third tight end, or you'd have a starting caliber above average right guard to upgrade from Tyree Phillips, who is a rookie right now and was never going to be as good as Marshall Yanda. But you don't know if those moves are going to present themselves between now and the deadline. So what did present itself was an opportunity to acquire Ngakoue, and you improve your pass rush with the thought in mind of knowing what you need to do against Kansas City, besides scoring more points, which is obviously a big part of that. It was, you need to be able to rush 4 and pressure Mahomes with 4, and then you can drop 7 in the coverage, and it gives you more flexibility that way. The Ravens did not have the ability to do that. They had to rely on the blitz, and Mahomes killed them. So you've improved your ability there. You know that your depth in the secondary is a little more vulnerable now than it had been because you've lost Tavon Young, you've lost Amon Marshall, you've lost Anthony Averett for the next 5 or 6 weeks with the shoulder injury. So you're one injury away from that secondary looking much more ordinary. So if that happens, and you hope it doesn't, but if it does, your pass rush has become that much better, and you're leaning on that even more now. So this is all about, we talk about the puzzle, right? We talk about the puzzle pieces of a salary cap, but roster building is about puzzle, about that same concept. You want as many pieces as possible, knowing that you're going to lose pieces along the way. You're going to have some that are going to be lost to injury, or guys get old and they're not as good anymore. You make a lineup change, whatever it might be, but you want outs, you want options. And Yannick Ngakoue just gave the Ravens more options in terms of what they do. And I still think they're going to blitz a ton. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this changes their identity dramatically, but it just gives you a different option. And I think it can make some of those blitzes that much more successful. And come January, or come this week, if Pittsburgh's able to stop the blitz, or Tennessee, or whatever teams we're talking about in the coming weeks, it gives them a little more clout if you get in a position where you want to drop more into coverage and you're rushing 3 or you're rushing 4. As their defense has been constructed the last couple of years, when they've rushed 4, they're consistently not getting there. So you want to be in a position where you can get there and you can make life more difficult for Patrick Mahomes or Ryan Tannehill or Ben Roethlisberger. So the last 3 weeks, yeah, their pass rush was was terrific, but you're not going up against the Eagles' offensive line every week. You're not going up against Washington's offensive line every week. You're not facing a rookie quarterback in Joe Burrow every week who's not used to the kind of defense that you like to play. You're going up against veterans who have seen what you do. So I just think this was about flexibility and giving them more options. And look, could they still acquire a guard at some point? Sure. Could they still acquire a wide receiver at some point? Sure. Could they add a third tight end into the mix to be a little more viable there? Sure. Do I think that they're going to do all those things? No, because you're not going to be able to make all those moves, and you only have so many resources you can use.
But I would say at this point, and this speaks to me being 52, you being a little younger, you being of the baseball background, and baseball sort of moving away from my existence and many other people in my life lately. You and Moeller, the last 2 dudes I know still watching baseball, sitting around at this point. But I would say this, baseball had an incredible hot stove of off-season and winter meetings. And when it was glorious around here in the 90s, there was B.J. Suroff signed on Monday, and this guy signed on Friday. And there was something really exciting about that football didn't really offer. Football, even when football came here in the 90s, it was, we can sign a McCrary or a Saragusa, or we can make a deal, or we can sign a free agent, or we can sign a Shannon Sharp. But it's always the draft. There is something about modern football now and trading in football and these miserable malcontents, these legendary, Antonio Browns and Le'Veon Bells that find themselves unemployed in week 7 annually, literally, all emanating from the Steelers, by the way, who are undefeated without those guys, which is amazing. But I find that this does keep you on your toes a little more. where Le'Veon Bell is in a Chiefs uniform. And, I look up and Gronkowski and Brady are running around and, oh, by the way, there's Antonio Brown. And what the hell are they all doing in pewter, So there is a little bit, and I guess that's what makes the NBA exciting to the kids, right? That, year to year, where LeBron decides to play, he brings a championship or a chance to win a championship. That the NFL hasn't been like that with changing helmets the way the NBA has, and certainly the rent-a-player that baseball has become, and even hockey to some degree, where guys move around a ton. Football hasn't been a move around a ton for stars for the most part. Stars stay where they are, and that's by the design of the system. But then there's the next level of, I used to be a star. I'm Earl Thomas. I'm Ed Reed at the end. I'm whatever. Or, my pal Chad Brown talks about when Belichick would call him every year right around now, 15 years ago, and say, hey, do you have 6 games in you? Do you have 8 games in you? And Chad would answer that call because he wanted to go win a championship. That there are those players. I mean, I joke about Suggs, but I don't know if he's been on a recumbent bike running around or out in the desert counting his money or what he's doing. I haven't seen whether he's fat or skinny or whatever, but those are the kinds of calls that you make in the NFL now that maybe 10, 15 years ago wasn't this much fun.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the trades, to your point, the trade deadline in baseball, was always not even talking the last 5 years for the Orioles specifically, and the tail end of the
all of my adulthood,
Showalter Duquette era.
Of my adulthood.
But it was just fun,
yes,
right?
Sure.
It was so much fun in that way, and you never heard about trades in the NFL. Yes, you had them, but typically they were the draft day trades, and
well, from a fan standpoint,
up,
Luke,
like
and you're the nerd about all of this, but I built my life on being a sports nerd, So part of it was that you would really understand the value of your minor league players. You would,
Sure.
take a little time to understand who your prospects were, that when the Mets want Alex Ochoa in a deal or, that someone demands Jeffrey Hammonds in a deal, that you understand the value of all of that. And it made you play general manager a little bit. And the NFL didn't provide that other than Mel Kiper, right? Other than on draft day, you didn't feel like we can go get a real pass rusher during Halloween, that the NFL has relaxed that a little bit. And it's going to separate the good and the bad, right? Because at some point, and I guess we were an unlikely benefactor of the Eugene Monroe, right? Like you wind up taking some 0-8, first round draft pick at whatever the cost, but some of those players are more available if something were to happen, God forbid, to Marlon Humphrey this week, that the Ravens might be able to work something out in modern day terms to, look at the Steelers this week in fleecing the Dolphins last year in the middle of the season, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting that way. I think what we're seeing, and Eric DaCosta has been one of the headliners here. You could talk about Howie Roseman. There are other GMs in the league, but you've definitely seen movement to be a little more creative. And to your point, think about it. The NFL didn't even have free agency until the early 90s. You didn't have compensatory picks until the mid 90s, and we see how the Ravens have used that system to their benefit. And but as we're getting a little bit deeper into this analytics era of football, which, analytics have always been there. It's just they weren't called that. But teams that are much more enlightened and looking for edges, you have teams like the Ravens and some others. The Ravens aren't alone there, but they've certainly been a headliner in that department that are looking at these guys in terms of being assets. That's not to say the human element goes away, but you also understand, to your point, guys that have value, guys that have diminishing value, someone that you get rid of a year early rather than a year late. These are all concepts that haven't necessarily been labeled analytics over the years, but we've seen the Ravens use these concepts. The 80-20 rule. We've talked about that for 2 decades here in Baltimore, but that's an analytical concept right there.
By the way, there's got to be an analytical concept about dead money being okay. In the same way that baseball now says strikeouts are okay, and and stealing's not okay, and hit and run's not okay. I would say that the Ravens look at dead money on Earl Thomas and would say we forecast for an 8.5% every year. Whatever that number is, there's a formula to say we can live without Earl Thomas other than he smells, let's get him out of here, that there is something that they fall back on that that says that things are going to be okay, that they eat Joe Flacco's last year?
Well, in that specific example, it's because you have a quarterback on a rookie contract and you have much more cap flexibility. Now go back to the Ray Rice situation and the dead money there. And Haloti Nada, remember, was cut his final year and there was dead money there. That's when you were paying a quarterback a lot. And guess what? You got 2015 then, where the Ravens went 5-11. So again, it does show, just flexibility, the benefit of having a quarterback on a rookie contract. But I think just the creativity. I mean, you just see so many more trades now, and I think teams are getting a better. Not all, but I think many teams are out there are getting a better idea as far as what those draft picks mean. And I think you've even seen a team like the Ravens, who you hear all the time how much they love picks, right? But we've seen Eric DeCosta be willing to trade some picks that, look, you can look at what the Ravens just traded away for Yannick Ngakoue. They give up a third-round pick. Yeah, you know what? That third-round pick could have been your next Mark Andrews or your next Orlando Brown or your next Brandon Williams, guys that they've drafted in the third round. But you also know that you took Chris Wormley in the third round. You took Bronson Kafusi, the pick after Yannick Ngakoue in that 2016 draft. So, an interesting juxtaposition there, I thought, looking back at that. But you know that they're assets and they have value to them, but you know that it's not absolute value. You know it's not guaranteed value. So if you can use and trade a couple of those picks and get something that you need now, and look, they might sign Yannick Ngakoue to a 4-year contract and they let Matt Judon walk out the door and they'll get a third-round comp pick for Matt Judon, depending on where he winds up, assuming he signs the kind of deal that he probably would end up signing. So, you kind of recoup that a third-round pick anyway, and then you have a guy that you might like a little bit better than you like Matt Judon in terms of which one you'd rather pay lucrative money to. So again, it's all about figuring this out. And there's not one absolute path to doing this. The teams that know this and understand this really well know that there are multiple paths that you can forge to get what you ultimately get to where you ultimately want to go, which is winning a Super Bowl. So it goes back to what I said about Ngakoue. Was edge rusher number one on the list? If I could, if you gave me my pick of 4 things that they could do, absolutely. Edge rusher might have been number 2 or number 3 at this point, based on what we're seeing with the offense and some of the growing pains and issues they've had there that we weren't necessarily anticipating. But again, you think about what can happen. You think about what's available to you. You think about how much cap space you have, which the Ravens don't have a whole lot of that at this point. So you look at all that. You look at what deals are available, and you make a decision. As I said last October, Marcus Peters, that was kind of a surprising move at the time. I mean, the Ravens had Marlon Humphrey. They had Brandon Carr. They knew Jimmy Smith was coming back after the bye week. They had Anthony Averett, who had a really strong season the year before. It's not as though their cornerback position was the elite of the elite, but it still looked really good overall. And I think people weren't panicked about that. But all of a sudden, you bring in Marcus Peters, and you're saying, "Oh my goodness! I mean, this is a 2-time Pro Bowl guy, a guy who would seemingly fit really well in this defense compared to what happened in LA, and not really fitting as well with what the Rams like to do defensively." And you saw what it did to their defense. It took their defense, which had been pretty so-so over the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, and they were arguably the best in the NFL the second half of the season, or one of the 2 or 3 best. So I'm not saying that's going to have the same impact with Ngakoue, but again, you look at what's available to you. You look at your resources. You try to predict how the market's going to play out. Yeah, in a perfect world, you'd love to have a better right guard. You'd love to have a veteran wide receiver to kind of upgrade the passing game a little bit. But you don't know if those things are going to present themselves, or you don't know if the asking price is going to be remotely realistic, because as much as I just said Eric DeCosta is willing to move picks, that doesn't mean he's just going to give them away or foolishly just shed picks, because they also understand that they're entering territory that they just paid Marlon Humphrey, and they're going to be paying Lamar Jackson, and we assume they're going to be paying Ronnie Stanley and Mark Andrews, and who knows what happens with Marquise Brown. I mean, we know the names at this point, but with all those contracts coming, then those draft picks become that much more important. So this was a move where the Ravens weighed it and said, yeah, a 3rd and a 5th, that's not going to break us, even if Ngakoue is just fine and then moves on and signs elsewhere, well, you'll probably get a third-round comp pick back. So even with that concept in the big picture, you kind of gave up a fifth-round pick for half a season of Yannick Ngakoue. That sounds pretty good to me, you know. So I
Well,
think
wake
from
me
that,
in February and let me know where we are then, right?
yeah,
Then you find that if it's a good rental or not.
But that's not even true from the standpoint of, you know, I mean, even if Marcus Peters had not re-signed with them and he left at the end of last season, I'm still making that move, even knowing what happened with Tennessee. I mean, Kenny Young and a fifth-round pick, I'll do that. I'd do that again, even if you told me Marcus Peters was going to leave at the end of the season. I mean, that was a no-brainer kind of move. So, but you do your homework. You assess where other teams are. You look where other teams are from a cap standpoint, which I think is an interesting wrinkle this year, not knowing what financial impact the pandemic's going to have on the cap for next year and even, you know, the next couple years. Even from beyond the cap standpoint, just a cash over cap standpoint. I mean, you're going to have teams that, frankly, are probably going to be trying to save some cash. Because I mean, we've seen it widespread in baseball. You know, there are teams like Mike Brown in Cincinnati who has been notoriously cheap over the years. So, you know, you try to exploit that. And not saying the Ravens did that with the Vikings necessarily, but you look and see what's out there and you try to make moves to help your football team and give yourself flexibility and give yourself some outs. So, you know, it's like I said, their pass rush had looked fine over the last 3 weeks against 3 below average offensive lines, or you can put more stock in what we saw last year and what we saw against Kansas City, and also acknowledging that they're a little bit thinner in the secondary now, or a lot thinner than they had been in terms of, you know, cover for injuries at this point to their starters. So you pull the trigger, and we'll see what happens over the next week to see if there's another move to be made. I'm guessing if there is, it's probably not going to be a blockbuster unless they're trading a player, trading some salary, which I suppose is possible. But you know, you know that Eric DeCosta is going to continue to look. And to your point, whether it's Marcus Peters or whether it's signing Josh Bynes off his couch, or LJ Fort, who had been waived in
Or D'Amato
Philadelphia,
Pekka, who I'd
or
forgotten about, right?
yeah, who had, you know, Domata Peko, who looked like he was going to be retired. You know, Justin Ellis was out there. I mean, these were guys that contributed last year, and guys that a couple of them stuck around and have been contributors this year. So I would suspect there's going to be another move at some point. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be a big trade, but you know, you mentioned Terrell Suggs. I'm guessing it's not Suggs, but there might be some other team's version of a guy who, you know, was kind of at the end, but has stayed in shape. You never know what's going to happen. Ravens get an injury.
Playing on the Jets, playing on the Giants, right? Playing on a bad team,
I mean,
right?
you know, some offensive lineman, something like. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, look at how Kansas City wound up with Suggs. I mean, that wasn't a trade deadline move. You know, he was let go in Arizona, and he ends up signing, or I guess being claimed by Kansas City. I mean, it's
after saying
you
you wanted to come here.
yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's all part of the game, and it's going to be interesting to see how the next week plays out as we get to the deadline. But even after that, the Ravens have made it clear they're not done building a roster. And I thought that was, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this now as we're talking. That statement that Eric DeCosta put out, you know, when they announced the Ngakoue trade on Thursday, the final line I thought was so interesting, in him just saying, "We are not done building this football team." The exact quote was, "Finally, we are not finished building this team as we continue to chase our ultimate goals," which, you know, that's a pretty significant flex there to say, hey, we're looking to make more moves. And as I mentioned, they're tight against the cap. So, you know, does that mean you restructure Marcus Peters' deal a little bit? You know, that would be an option to create a little more cap space, sure. But even if it's more savvy, under the radar moves, I think what we've already seen in the Eric DeCosta era was something that has looked a little bit different. I mean, not that Ozzie never made trades. You mentioned Eugene Monroe earlier in our conversation, but you definitely see a more aggressive approach here. I mean, just look at the sheer number of trades they've made, not just draft day, but training camp last year. They made 3 trades in August last year. I mean, they've shown an ability to be aggressive, or a willingness to be aggressive. And not that every move is going to move the meter in a dramatic degree, but you know, you make enough of those moves, you're either going to pick up some assets for the future that could help you, or you end up finding someone that's going to end up helping you a lot more than you would have anticipated. I mean, I'll say this, when they added LJ Fort last year, I was aware of him. I mean, someone who played in the AFC North, and I figured would be a nice special teams guy for them, which he has been, by the way. But he's been a really important part of their defense. And when you look at their inside linebacker group, with Queen and Malik Harrison and some of these other guys that are young, even Chris Board, who's been around a few years, he's still a young man. LJ Fort's provided some veteran leadership there and has played really well. So you look at that move, which very few people were talking about that. Look at how that's played out now over the last calendar year. So Eric DeCosta, whether he's going to bat 1,000 or not, no, he's not going to bat 1,000. I mean, the Earl Thomas move, we can look at that and say that was a mistake. Eric would admit that looking at how it played out. But for every move like that, chances are there's going to be multiple moves that you say, wow, that was smart. That's made them better, and doesn't guarantee you're going to win a championship, but it puts you in a better position to have a better chance to do that. And that's what it's all about. You get to January, and it's not the crapshoot that baseball is in that way, because there is a clear difference between the number 1 seed and the number 7 seed now, as we talk about an expanded field. But you definitely, you get in the tournament and you see how it's going to play out. And I think the Ravens, with adding Ngakoue, that to me felt like a move. And I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com. That move right away, I thought of Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City in January, more so than the Steelers this week or Indianapolis next week. I mean, this team was still going to win plenty of games and make the playoffs. And, that wasn't in question. But this is the kind of move that improves your chances for January. And that's where the Ravens are at this point. The Super Bowl or bust, right? I mean, that's where they are. They've been to the playoffs. It's time to get to January and actually do something when you get there.
And we conclude this portion of our Eric DeCosta Appreciation Hour. You can find Luke at Owings Mills, Luke at WNST.net. We're getting ready for the Steelers this week. And Steelers week, I'll be in Pittsburgh a whole bunch. It's obviously a big, big voting week. We're encouraging everyone, especially you in Pennsylvania, to get out there and vote. And let's stay safe through this pandemic and watch some football this week and enjoy some intelligent conversation, all the things we do out at Baltimore Positive. Made possible by our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, residential plumbing, boiler services, water analysis, water treatment delivery, and did my hot water heater, which I'm very appreciative of now that the weather's gotten a little more crisp. acleanwater.com. You'll see me drinking their clean water on the set. You can find them at 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. They also treat the water at the Ravens training facility. Find them at Liberty Pure Solutions, acleanwater.com. Also, Todd Schuler going to join us here this week. Personal injury workers, compensation lawyers, but my pals from Essex who come on and talk about life and the Constitution and sports and football and turkey eating and eggnog and pumpkin pie, ice cream, stuff from Taharka, and all the things we do around here. Speaking of Taharka, I've been trying out that pumpkin pie cheesecake, and then they have the pumpkin spice latte. I don't know what I'm going to do when these go, but the eggnog is coming in. There is a rumor that I'm going to be participating in the first ever I made a batch of ice cream with my Uncle Claude when I was about 8 in South Carolina, in Shoals Junction, South Carolina. This will be my second batch of ice cream I've ever made with Taharka for the Eggnog Festival. And that'll make me feel holiday. It'll get the purple lights going and glowing in the studio. Maybe I'll do some things in here as well. You can find Luke at WNST.net. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. You can find Taharka and have them deliver that delicious ice cream out at the new BaltimorePositive.com. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking our disdain for the Pittsburgh Steelers and love for all things Baltimore Ravens.